Our ancestors certainly had a flair for the dramatic when it came to some of the cities and structures that they created. They built deep into the ground and high into the sky, and used shapes and styles that are mystifying when we look upon them with our modern eyes. Some of the buildings that they left behind are so impressive and so unimaginably complex that we still don't really know how or why they were built. Here are some of the most mysterious ancient structures on the planet, with a couple of modern examples thrown in for good measure. What better place to start than with what appears to be the set of a horror movie, sitting right in the middle of a beautiful Italian garden? These terrifying carved statues and caves are known as the monsters of Bomarzo, and they've been giving people nightmares since they were built during the 16th century. Prince Pier Francesco Orsini commissioned the creation of the strange spectacle in 1552, and he never meant for them to be beautiful. The prince was struggling with his mental health at the time. He had battled through a brutal war and had lost both his best friend and his wife in separate incidents. The monster garden was to be an expression of his grief. Pier Ligorio was the architect chosen to realize his vision, an interesting choice given that Ligorio was known for more refined works like the Cathedral of St. Peter. If the massive screaming head in the middle of the garden doesn't scare you, perhaps its accompanying inscription will. It read simply, "All reason departs." Standing next to it is a giant fish head, and a giant tearing another giant in two. This is a monument to violent insanity. In Lalibela, Ethiopia, you'll find a series of churches that look like no other churches on the face of the planet. Most of them are carved out of one single solid piece of rock, and some of them are underground. The most impressive of all of them is Beta Georgis, or to give its English name, the Church of St. George. The vast temple was cut directly into the ground and finished from the inside out, and seems to be the focal point of the 11 churches that exist in the area. All of them are connected by tunnels, and were built between the 12th and 13th centuries. How works of such incredible beauty were created using the tools and methods known to be available at that time is a mystery. From the surface, the roof of the Church of St. George has the appearance of a Greek cross, but the full building extends 130 feet down into the darkness, almost out of sight. Although strange to our eyes, the church is completely in keeping with its surroundings. There is no electricity in Lalibela, and there aren't even any roads. Here, time hasn't passed at all for centuries. While the concept of a church carved out of a single piece of rock is unusual, it isn't completely unheard of. There isn't much of a visual similarity between the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela and the Derinkuyu temple in India, but the processes used to create them must have been largely similar. The seemingly unfinished Derinkuyu temple is even older than the Ethiopian churches, having been built between the 8th and 9th centuries. Ancient texts suggest that several monolithic Pandian temples used to exist in the past, but this is the only one that is still standing. The shabby appearance of the bottom of the temple is down to the fact that it was being carved from the top down. The top level is stunningly ornate and intricate, with no less than 122 religious sculptures inside it. Almost as mysterious as the temple itself is the reason for its abandonment. Local legends say that a father and son were in a race to complete a rock-carved church, and when it became apparent the son was going to win, the father murdered him in a fit of rage, ensuring that his temple would never be completed. As Derinkuyu loosely translates as Temple of the Slayer, there may be some truth to the tale. Multiculturalism is a different concept to realize. It involves people of strikingly different religious and moral beliefs living side by side harmoniously. Although many parts of the world seem to struggle with the idea today, it didn't seem to be a problem in and around the Ellora caves in Verul, India, which were started in the 6th century and worked on for at least the next 400 years. Here, followers of the Jain, Buddhist, and Hindu religions went about their worship side by side and created some breathtaking vertically carved monuments in the process. The site covers an area a little over a square mile and hosts 34 different temples, each of which have their own style, purpose, and internal decorations. While it would be possible to replicate such design work today, the enormous cost would put anyone out of the idea of trying, as would the incredible amount of time it would take to see the project through to completion. It was only through sheer religious devotion that the Ellora caves became possible. Indeed, were it not for followers of the three different belief systems working so closely together, it may never have happened at all. When it comes to the stone house in Moreira do Rei, Portugal, almost everything you need to know about it is in its name. It's a cottage that's been created from two wedged together boulders in the middle of the countryside. Known to speakers of the Portuguese language as Casa do Penedo, the house sparked controversy when pictures of it went viral on social media a few years ago. Many people believed it looked too absurd to be real and assumed it was a Photoshop forgery. Well, they were wrong, though. It's very real, and somebody calls it home. Details on how it and when it was made are scarce because the owner of the property is keen to maintain their privacy. That's probably why they decided to live in the middle of a rock miles away from civilization in the first place. Since it became an internet curiosity, a fence has been erected around the property, but it's still possible to look at it from a distance. This is the closest thing we'll ever see to Fred Flintstone's house in real life. The first thing you're likely to think when you see the so-called Moonhole homes in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is that they look a little rustic and ramshackle. Their designers wouldn't be offended if you held that opinion, though. They're supposed to look this way. Every scrap of material that went into building them was scavenged or salvaged from elsewhere. The story of the Moonhole homes starts in 1960. When an eccentric couple from New York, USA, named Thomas and Gladys Johnson decided to start building themselves an idyllic tropical house on the island called Bequia. With no traditional building materials available and very little construction experience, they used whale bones, blocks of sand, shipwreck detritus, and fallen tree branches to go about their work. Other people saw what they were doing and decided to join in. There are now 19 of the strange homes on the southernmost tip of the island, inside which you'll find that all of the electronic devices are solar-powered. It's not a way of life that everyone would cope with, but for the community living here now, it's paradise. Carving temples and buildings directly into the ground below your feet is extremely difficult. Doing the same thing with the side of a sheer mountain ought to be impossible. But the dedicated Buddhists who made the Maijishan Grottoes in Chanshui, China, somehow managed to pull it off. There are more than 7,000 Buddhist sculptures and icons cut into the giant sandstone mountain, and they've been there for something like 1,500 years. Viewed from a distance, the side of the mountain looks almost like a sponge with porous holes in its surface. Only when you get closer do you realize that the holes are actually almost 200 caves, connected by an intricate network of ridges and stairs. Bizarrely, some of the stone used to make the sculptures inside the caves doesn't come from the mountain itself. That means not only did someone have to scale the near vertical side of the mountain to get into the caves, but they also had to do so while carrying bulky stone statues with them. How did they do that? Or perhaps more importantly, why did they do that? It's a mystery lost to time. Our next mysterious monument is also carved out of rock, but this isn't a place of worship. Instead, it's a place of rest. It's the Mayan necropolis, and you'll find it in Demre, Turkey. As far as archaeologists are concerned, they're the definitive greatest works of the Lycian culture, and they were made approximately 2,400 years ago. These days, their colors are somewhat faded, but centuries ago, they were painted vivid shades of yellow, red, and blue. Death for the Lycians wasn't something to be mourned and then forgotten. It was to be celebrated, and the beautiful village of the dead with its bright colors, was part of that celebration. The most famous of all the tombs here is the Lion Tomb. Explored by Charles Fellows in 1840, there are 11 separate statues inside the tomb, thought to represent the family of the deceased, and placed there to ensure that he wouldn't be lonely in the afterlife. As strangely beautiful as the necropolis is, access to it didn't come cheaply. Only the wealthy and influential were destined to be interred here. Everybody else went to their grave the old-fashioned way, straight into the ground. Let's stay in Turkey for a moment and move along to Akarsukoyu, where we'll find the Sumela monastery set directly into the wall of a cliff. Also known as the Virgin Mary Monastery, it was officially founded in the year 386 and would surely have been one of the most remarkable architectural achievements of its era. The entrance to the monastery is approximately 4,000 feet above the ground, and its difficult-to-access location may be the least part of the reason it survived for so long. It was founded as an Athenian Christian facility, and Christians haven't always been welcome in Turkey. Many Christian temples and buildings have been destroyed and rebuilt in the land over the centuries. And even the Sumela monastery has been wrecked and then repaired a few times. But the Ottoman Emperor Mehmed II took a liking to the palace and proclaimed that it was to be protected. All of his successors respected his decree, and so the monastery and its monastic occupants have been left alone ever since. There are even a few monks within its walls today, although most of the visitors who go there are now tourists. The hardest thing to comprehend when you're looking at images of Longmen Grottoes in Luoyang, China, is that every single one of these tiny black holes in the side of a cliff is a cave, and each of those caves is a tiny independent Buddhist temple. If it wasn't for the enormous Buddha sculpture that sits at the heart of the grottos, you would be forgiven for thinking that the entire site was created by human-sized termites. The work of carving out the grottos happened over the course of several hundred years, but most historians agree that the bulk of it was carved out between the 6th and 7th centuries, starting during the time of China's Tang dynasty. Owning a small temple in the side of a rock became something of a status symbol, and so wealthy nobles and high-ranking military officers spent their money commissioning their own little niche in the limestone, and then furnishing it with statues. It's thought that more than 100,000 religious carvings existed at that site. If you added all the contents of all the caves together, many were stolen and looted in the years since their construction. But these days the grottos are protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so no further lootings are likely. Given how widespread and powerful the Inca civilization was, it's amazing we know so little about who they were, what they believed, or why they created a lot of their most famous historical sites in Peru. Aramu Muru isn't among those famous historical sites, but it may count as the culture's most mysterious legacy. As far as archaeologists have been able to ascertain, the site was abandoned in a state of partial completion, and little was left behind other than a deliberately carved doorway that appears to go nowhere. The site, close to the border of Bolivia on Lake Titicaca, went completely unnoticed by the wider world until mountaineer Jose Luis Delgado discovered it by chance in the early 1990s. Delgado made inquiries among the people who lived closest to it and was told it was the Gate of the Gods, a place where many disappearances have been reported, along with alleged sightings of people walking through the doorway and straight into the rock. We suspect that it isn't really a Stargate-style portal, but at the same time, we have no idea why the Inca took the time to flatten, carve, and shape this rock before abandoning it. Were it not for the hapless exploits of a Turkish man trying to carry out some home improvements during the 1960s, the lost underground city of Derinkuyu may never have been rediscovered. He'd been looking to expand the space available below his home and knock down a basement wall only to find an enormous cavern behind it, a cavern that had clearly been carved by human hands and appeared to go on forever. Derinkuyu is colossal. 18 tiers have been cut into the volcanic rock, extending to a depth of 250 feet below the ground. Anyone who claims to know who built it and why is a liar, although the most commonly accepted theory is that the initial work was done by the Phrygians about 3,000 years ago. It's been lost and found again several times since, including a period in which it was used by early Christians to hide from advancing Rome forces. Once they were inside, they rolled the gigantic stone doors shut and relied on the carefully designed stone shafts that ran into the city's surface to provide them with light and air to breathe. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.